I was walking home late, cutting through the industrial district because it shaved 20 minutes off the trip. The factories had long been abandoned, their broken windows staring down at me like hollow, toothless mouths. My boots scraped against wet asphalt, each step echoing too loudly in the emptiness. A storm had just passed, leaving the air sharp with the smell of rust and soaked concrete. Streetlights buzzed overhead, but most of them flickered uselessly, throwing shadows that stretched and snapped. I wasn't planning on being out this late, but my boss had kept me after closing, and the last bus had already gone. So I decided to walk. Just an hour on foot, I told myself. Nothing dangerous, nothing strange. I even had music queued up, but the thought of plugging in my earbuds felt wrong somehow, like I needed to hear everything. The silence wasn't silent. It pulsed with tiny noises, drips, creaks, the faint hum of dying electricity. That's when I noticed my shadow and realized it wasn't moving with me anymore. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. The streetlight above me sputtered, casting everything in stuttering yellow light. My shadow stretched out behind me on the wet pavement. But when I took another step forward, it stayed exactly where it was, mid-stride. One leg extended, arms slightly out for balance. Frozen like someone had pressed pause on just that piece of the world. I laughed. It came out nervous and thin. The sound bounced off the factory walls and came back wrong, like someone else had laughed with me. I blamed the flickering lights. Old bulbs did strange things, made the world skip and jump. I took 3 more steps forward, watching over my shoulder. My shadow remained fixed in place, 20 feet behind me now, a dark cutout of a girl who wasn't there anymore. "This is stupid," I said out loud. My voice felt too small in all that space. I walked back toward where my shadow waited. As I got closer, something snapped, like a rubber band pulled too tight, finally giving way. The shadow jerked forward, sliding across the ground to meet my feet again. But the movement felt wrong, delayed, like watching an old movie where the sound doesn't match the picture. I stood under the light for a moment, raising my arms. My shadow copied me, but half a second too late. I dropped my arms. It followed, sluggish and strange. The way it moved made my stomach turn. Not quite right. Not quite mine. The next block of streetlights had died completely. Just metal poles standing in the dark, like skeletal trees. I walked faster through that section, but something made me look back. My shadow had stretched impossibly long behind me. It reached up the factory wall, bent around a corner where no light should have carried it. The shape of it had changed too. The proportions all wrong. Arms too long, head too small, or maybe too large. Hard to tell when it kept shifting. I turned away and kept walking, told myself not to look back again, but I could feel it dragging behind me, heavy, like pulling a wet blanket across concrete. The factories on either side pressed closer here. Their windows were all broken, just dark squares looking down. But in some of them, I swear I saw movement. Quick twitches of shadow that vanished when I looked directly at them. The kind of movement you catch in the corner of your eye. The kind that makes you doubt what you saw. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Mom asking if I'd made it home. I started typing a response, but my fingers felt clumsy. The screen kept dimming and brightening on its own. The message I'd typed said something different than what I remembered writing. Still walking became still watching. I deleted it and tried again. This time it auto-corrected to shadow walking. I gave up and put the phone away. That's when I heard them. Footsteps, not quite matching mine. A half beat off, like an echo that came too soon. I stopped. The other steps took one more before stopping too. I spun around, expecting to see someone following me, but the street stretched empty behind me. Just my shadow, twisted and wrong, pooling at my feet like spilled ink. I started walking again, faster now. The footsteps returned immediately. This time I didn't stop. I just listened. They weren't behind me. They were coming from my shadow. Each time my foot hit the pavement, a softer sound followed from the dark shape trailing me, like it was learning how to walk by copying my movements. My shadow started doing things I wasn't doing. I caught it scratching its head when my hands were in my pockets. It tilted sideways when I walked straight. Once, I swear it waved at something in one of the factory windows. My arms never moved. The puddles from the storm created their own problems. In the water's reflection, everything looked different. My shadow moved independently there. While I stood still, trying to catch my breath, the shadow in the puddle walked toward me, step by step through the reflected world. When it reached the edge of the puddle, the water rippled without anything touching it. I jumped over the next puddle, avoided every bit of standing water after that. But I could still see them in my peripheral vision. Dark shapes moving through the reflections, all walking in different directions, some toward me, some away, some just standing there, watching. The whispers started at the next intersection, soft voices drifting from the alleyways between buildings. At first I thought it might be homeless people, maybe kids messing around, but the words were all the same. Keep walking, keep walking, keep walking, over and over, like a chant, like a warning, like a command. I hurried past the alley mouths without looking into them. But in each one, shadows seemed to multiply. Where there should have been one shadow from one object, there were 3, 5, dozens, all slightly different shapes, all moving independently. Then it happened. For just a moment, my shadow split completely in two. One part clung to my feet, following my movements perfectly. The other lingered back where I'd first noticed the frozen shadow. I could see both clearly. 2 versions of my dark outline, one obedient, one rebellious. The rebellious one started following me, not attached to my body anymore, but trailing behind like a separate person, made of darkness. It moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped. But it was always 3 steps behind, always watching. I turned the next corner and stopped cold. The entire street ahead had been swallowed by darkness. Not normal night darkness. This was thick, solid looking, like someone had painted over reality with black paint. The streetlights on the other side were working. I could see their glow. But between me and them stretched 50 feet of pure shadow. I stood at the edge for a long moment. Behind me, those whispers grew louder. Keep walking. My trailing shadow caught up, standing right behind me now, close enough that I could feel cold radiating from it. The darkness ahead seemed to pulse, waiting. I had no choice. I stepped into it. Inside the darkness, everything changed. I could still feel the ground under my feet, but I couldn't see it. Couldn't see my own hands when I held them up. But somehow, I could see my shadow. It glowed with its own dark light, if that makes sense. A deeper black against the regular black. And it wasn't alone. The trailing shadow had followed me in. Now there were two of them, my attached shadow and the independent one. They circled each other like animals establishing dominance. The free shadow was winning. It stood taller, moved more confidently. My regular shadow seemed to shrink. I kept walking through the thick darkness. Each step felt like pushing through curtains. Heavy, suffocating curtains that didn't want to let me pass. The free shadow stayed right behind me. I could hear it breathing. Shadows shouldn't breathe. When I finally emerged on the other side, gasping and shaking, I was alone. The trailing shadow had vanished, but my regular shadow felt different, heavier, like it had absorbed something from that dark passage. It moved differently too, more deliberately, with purpose. I checked my phone. 2 hours had passed. That couldn't be right. The walk through the darkness had taken maybe 2 minutes, but the timestamp didn't lie. Somehow, I'd lost time in there. My memories felt scrambled. I remembered leaving work, but the details kept shifting. Had I really stayed late? Or had I left on time? Did my boss even ask me to stay? The more I tried to remember, the more the memories seemed to dissolve, like grabbing at smoke. I couldn't actually remember the walk before the industrial district. How had I gotten here? Which route had I taken? The questions made my head hurt, a sharp pain right behind my eyes. When I tried to think about work, about earlier that day, everything came back fuzzy and gray. The only clear memory was this walk, these shadows, this growing wrongness that followed every step. An old factory loomed on my right. The sign above the entrance hung crooked, most of the letters missing. But the door stood open, not broken or forced, just open, like an invitation. Warm air drifted out, which made no sense. These places had been abandoned for years. I don't know why I went inside. My feet just carried me through the doorway before my brain could object. The warmth wrapped around me immediately. Not comforting warmth. The sticky, oppressive kind. Like being inside something's mouth. The walls were moving. That's the only way to describe it. Shadows crawled across them like living things. Hand shapes reaching out, grasping at nothing. Face shapes forming and dissolving. All of them seemed to turn toward me when I entered. From somewhere deep in the building came a sound. Not quite voice, not quite machinery. It spoke without words, but I understood it anyway. Stop moving, it said directly into my thoughts. Stop moving and remember. That's when the memory hit me, clear and sharp as broken glass. I was 7 years old. My grandmother sat beside my bed, her fingers cold on my forehead. She smelled like lavender and something else, something old and dusty. She was telling me about shadows, about the rules. Never walk alone after dark, she said. Her voice had that serious tone adults use when they really need you to listen. The shadow doesn't belong to you then. It belongs to the dark. And the dark always wants more. I'd laughed because I was 7 and shadows were just shadows. She grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop my giggling. Promise me, she said. Promise you'll never give it a chance to separate. Once it tastes freedom, it won't want to go back. I promised. Of course I promised. She was scaring me, and I would have said anything to make her stop. She died 3 weeks later. I forgot about the warning, forgot about the rules, until now. The factory around me pulsed with recognition. The shadow hands on the walls reached toward me with more purpose. My own shadow had started to peel away from my feet. slowly, like tape being pulled off skin. It hurt. Not physically, but somewhere deeper. In the place where identity lives. I ran, burst back out onto the street, my shadow snapping back to me like a rubber band. But it was angry now. I could feel its rage in the way it moved. Sharp, violent gestures that I wasn't making. The street had changed while I was inside. The buildings looked the same, but their positions were wrong. The intersection that should have been ahead was now behind me. The factory I'd just left was on the wrong side of the road. Even the puddles had moved, reflecting lights that didn't exist. My shadow was pulling itself up. I watched, frozen, as it peeled away from the ground. First the head, then the shoulders, like someone doing a push-up in reverse. It stood there, a perfect dark copy of me. Same height, same shape. But the face had no features, just smooth darkness where eyes and mouth should be. Then it smiled. I don't know how something without a mouth could smile, but it did. The whole face split into a grin that was too wide, too knowing. I hadn't smiled. I hadn't moved my face at all, but my shadow had learned how. It reached out one dark hand toward me. I stumbled backward, but it wasn't trying to grab me. It was offering something, showing me something. In its palm sat a small object made of condensed darkness. It looked like a key, or maybe a seed, something that belonged inside me. "You dropped this," my shadow said. Its voice was my voice, but played backward and underwater. 20 years ago, when she died, you dropped this and never picked it up. I didn't understand. But my hand moved on its own, reaching for the object. The moment my fingers touched it, everything shattered. I wasn't walking home from work. I'd never been walking home from work. I was 7 years old, standing in my grandmother's hospital room. The machines had just gone quiet. The nurses had just pulled the sheet up. And I was angry. So angry that she'd left me. That she'd made me promise something impossible, then died before explaining why. So I'd done something a 7-year-old shouldn't know how to do. I'd grabbed my shadow and pulled, told it I didn't want it anymore, told it to go away and never come back. And it had listened. Part of it had separated, torn off like old skin. It had slithered under the hospital bed and disappeared. But shadows don't just disappear. They wait, they grow, they learn. For 20 years, that piece had been out there, moving through the dark spaces between buildings, feeding on other shadows, getting stronger. And now it had found me. Now it wanted to come home. "You called me back," the shadow me said, "when you walked alone tonight, when you broke the promise. You called me back without knowing it." The dark object in my hand was pulsing, warm and alive. It wanted to burrow into my chest, to restore something that had been missing for 20 years. But I could feel what would happen if I let it. The shadow wouldn't merge with me. It would replace me. I would become the shadow, and it would become real. "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain. The shadow laughed. My laugh, but colder. "You haven't felt real since that day. You know it. Everyone knows it. You're the echo. I'm the original." The world around us had stopped making sense. The street curved upward, defying gravity. The factories leaned in, their windows now eyes watching our confrontation. Other shadows had gathered, hundreds of them. All the abandoned shadows of people who'd broken the rules. They formed a circle around us, waiting to see who would win. My phone rang, Mom's ringtone, but when I answered, It wasn't her voice. It was mine. From 20 years ago. 7-year-old me crying in that hospital room. I want her back, the voice said. I want Grandma back. Make it stop hurting. The shadow stepped closer. I can make it stop. I've never hurt. I've never felt anything but purpose. Let me take over. You can rest. You can stop pretending to be whole. The dark object in my hand grew heavier. It wanted to choose. Wanted to pick which one of us was real. And the terrible truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. My memories felt borrowed. My emotions felt performed. When was the last time I'd felt genuinely present in my own life? The exchange is simple, my shadow continued. You become flat, weightless, free from all of this, and I become dimensional, real, complete. It took another step forward. Our hands touched, mine warm and shaking, its cold and steady. The moment of contact sent shockwaves through the gathered shadows. They pressed closer, hungry for the resolution. The transfer started immediately. I felt myself flattening, losing dimension. My thoughts became simpler, cleaner, just observations without emotional weight. The shadow, meanwhile, gained a substance. Color bled into its form. Not my colors, but something else. Something that had been waiting 20 years to exist. This is wrong, I tried to say, but my voice came out monotone, flat, like a shadow's voice. No, the shadow replied, and its voice had gained my inflections, my doubts, my humanity. This is correction. You were never supposed to keep the body after severing me. You've been borrowing it. The gathered shadows began to disperse. The show was ending. The exchange was almost complete. I could feel myself becoming less with each heartbeat. Soon I would be the one trailing behind, copying movements, existing only as a dark reflection. But then I remembered something else from that hospital room. Something my grandmother had whispered right before the end. Not to 7-year-old me, but to something else in the room, to my shadow. Guard her, she'd said, even if she sends you away. Guard her until she needs you back. The shadow hesitated, just for a moment, but that was enough. I grabbed the dark object with both hands and broke it in half. The sound it made was like tearing fabric and breaking bones and screaming all at once. Everything exploded outward. The gathered shadows scattered like birds. The warped street snapped back to normal geometry. The factory straightened, and my shadow and I flew apart, landing on opposite sides of the road. We stood up slowly, regarding each other across the wet asphalt. Neither of us was complete anymore. I could feel the hole where part of me was missing, and I could see the incompleteness in my shadow too. It flickered, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent. You broke it, the shadow said. You broke the only thing that could make either of us whole. We were never meant to be whole, I replied, not separately. The shadow considered this. Around us, the world held its breath. Even the flickering streetlights seemed to pause. Then, slowly, my shadow began to laugh. Not cruel laughter, sad laughter. The kind that comes when you finally understand a joke that isn't funny. She knew, it said. Your grandmother knew this would happen. She put the warning in your head so you'd break the rule. So we'd meet like this. So we'd have to choose. I nodded, because it was true. All of it. The warning hadn't been to keep us apart. It had been to ensure we came together when we were ready. When we could choose consciously instead of being forced by circumstance or tradition or fear. So what do we choose? I asked. The shadow walked toward me, not threatening this time, just tired. We choose what we should have chosen 20 years ago. We choose to grieve together, to be broken together, to heal together. It stood directly in front of me now, close enough to touch, close enough to merge, but neither of us moved. We just stood there, two parts of the same person, finally acknowledging each other. "I've seen things," the shadow said, "in the dark spaces. Things that aren't quite real but aren't quite fake either. The places where lost things go. The rooms that exist between walls. The conversations that happen in empty houses." "I've felt things," I replied. "All the emotions you couldn't carry. The grief that made you leave. The fear that kept me from calling you back. The loneliness of being incomplete." We reached out simultaneously. Our hands met, and this time there was no shock, no transfer, just recognition. The shadow began to flow back into me, but slowly, carefully, like pouring water into a cracked glass. I felt the memories it carried settling into place. The 20 years of wandering through impossible spaces. The knowledge of how thin reality really was. But something was wrong. As the shadow merged with me, I realized it had brought something else. Something that had attached itself during all those years in the dark. Another presence, older and hungrier than either of us. "What did you bring back?" I whispered. The shadow's voice, now coming from inside me, sounded terrified. "I didn't know it was there. It's been feeding on me, using me to get to you, to get to the light." That's when I felt it. The third thing inside me. Not me, not my shadow. Something else entirely. It spoke with neither my voice nor my shadow's voice. It spoke with the voice of the spaces between, the gaps in memory, the pauses between heartbeats. "Finally," it said, "a door that opens both ways." My body wasn't mine anymore. I could feel myself and my shadow pressed to the edges of our own consciousness while this thing took control. It walked my body forward, but the movement was wrong, too fluid, like water pretending to be human. The streetlights began exploding as we passed. Not violently, they just gave up, surrendering their light to the growing darkness that followed my possessed form. The factories started to dissolve, their edges becoming uncertain. Reality was coming undone. "This is what happens," the thing said through my mouth. "When you leave a shadow alone too long, it forgets what it's supposed to be. It becomes a door, and doors can be walked through from either side." I fought for control, and surprisingly, my shadow fought alongside me. We pushed against the invading presence together. 20 years of separation had made us weak individually, but together we were still stronger than one parasitic entity. "Get out," we said in unison, my voice and my shadow's voice overlapping. The thing laughed. "You invited me. Every step tonight, every moment of fear, every doubt about what was real. You built me a bridge and begged me to cross." But that wasn't quite true, and in recognizing the lie, I found our power. This thing fed on separation, on the spaces between things, on incompleteness, but my shadow and I were choosing to be complete, to be whole despite our brokenness. "We uninvite you," I said. "We close the door," my shadow added. "We are one person, complicated and messy and real," we said together. The thing shrieked, a sound like metal tearing and glass breaking and void screaming. It clawed at the inside of my mind, trying to maintain its foothold. But with each moment that my shadow and I accepted each other, its grip weakened. the world around us began to stabilize. The streetlights flickered back to life. The factories solidified. The impossible geometries straightened into normal, boring reality. And the thing inside me grew smaller and smaller until it was just a whisper, then just an echo, then nothing. I stood alone on the empty street, but not really alone. My shadow was with me, properly attached, moving in perfect synchronization. We were different now, changed. I could feel the places where we'd been broken and mended, the seams where 20 years of separation had left scars. But we were whole, or at least whole enough. I started walking again. This time, my shadow followed perfectly. No delay, no rebellion, just the natural connection between a person and their darkened reflection. The industrial district looked normal now. Abandoned and creepy, sure, but normal. No impossible angles, no crawling darkness, no whispers from empty spaces. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Are you okay? You haven't responded in hours." I checked the time. 3 hours had passed since I'd left work. The walk should have taken 1, but at least time was moving forward again. At least the numbers made sense. "I'm okay," I texted back. "Just had to figure something out." She responded immediately. "Your grandmother would be proud." That stopped me cold. Mom never talked about grandmother, neither did I. It was an unspoken agreement, born from grief too complicated to articulate, but somehow, she knew. Maybe she'd always known. "How did you know?" I typed. The same thing happened to me when I was 27, and to her when she was 33. It's a family gift, or curse. Depends on how you look at it. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I laughed, real laughter, with my shadow laughing silently beneath me. All these years of thinking I was broken, and it turned out I was just following family tradition. The rest of the walk home was uneventful, almost disappointingly so. No more shadow anomalies, no more reality glitches. Just a woman walking through an industrial district at night, taking the shortcut she probably shouldn't take, but making it home safely anyway. When I reached my apartment building, I paused at the entrance. The glass door reflected me and my shadow, now properly aligned. But I could see something else too, a faint shimmer around the edges, places where reality was thin, spaces where other shadows moved independently. The knowledge my shadow had brought back made these things visible. I understood now that the world was much stranger than most people realized. That shadows were more than just the absence of light. That promises to the dead carried weight. That being broken and mended made you stronger than never breaking at all. Inside my apartment, I turned on every light, not from fear, but from curiosity. I wanted to see my shadow from every angle. Wanted to understand this thing that was me, but not me. This dark twin I'd rejected and reclaimed. In the bathroom mirror, I saw something that made me smile. My shadow had its own reflection. Faint, barely visible, but there. A shadow of a shadow. Proof that even darkness could cast darkness. That even nothingness was something. I sat on my couch and did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I talked to my shadow. Not in my head, but out loud. Like it was a separate person. Because in a way, it still was. "I'm sorry," I said, "for sending you away, for making you spend 20 years alone in the dark." My shadow, of course, couldn't respond with words, but I felt its forgiveness in the way it moved. Gentle gestures that matched my own, but carried their own intention. It had already forgiven me. It had forgiven me the moment I'd called it back, even unknowingly. We're going to be different now, I continued. I can feel it. The things you learned, the places you've been, they're part of me now. I see the cracks in everything, the spaces where reality doesn't quite match up. My shadow nodded, or I nodded, and it followed. Hard to tell the difference anymore. That's when I noticed something new. Other shadows were visiting, sliding under my door, seeping through the windows, not threateningly, just curiously. They wanted to see the shadow that had returned, the one that had survived 20 years of separation and come back changed but intact. They gathered in the corners of my room. Shadows without people, lost, abandoned, forgotten. Some were ancient, some were fresh, all were incomplete. I understood what my grandmother had really been trying to teach me. The warning wasn't about danger. It was about responsibility. When you separate from your shadow, you create a void, and voids attract things, lost things, broken things, things looking for wholeness. These visiting shadows weren't evil. They were just searching, looking for their other halves, hoping someone would recognize them and call them home. My shadow had been lucky. It had been guarded, given purpose, held in trust until I was ready to reclaim it. Most shadows weren't so fortunate. I can't help you all, I said to the gathered darkness. I don't know where your people are. But even as I said it, I realized that wasn't entirely true. The knowledge my shadow had brought back included something else, a map of sorts, understanding of the connections between people and their shadows. I could see the threads, faint and gossamer thin, stretching from each lost shadow to somewhere else in the city. One shadow in particular caught my attention. Small, child-sized, it huddled in the corner, barely visible even among the darkness. But I recognized it. It belonged to the girl who lived upstairs, the one who never smiled, the one who walked like she was carrying invisible weight. You belong to Sarah, I said. The shadow perked up. It had been so long since anyone had acknowledged it, since anyone had seen it as more than just darkness in a corner. I made a decision then, maybe a foolish one, but my shadow agreed with it, so it couldn't be entirely wrong. I would help reunite the lost shadows with their people, not by force, not by tricks, but by teaching what my grandmother had taught me, what my mother had learned, what I had discovered tonight. Sometimes we need to break apart to understand what wholeness really means. Sometimes the shadow knows things the light can't see. Sometimes being complete means accepting the darkness as part of the definition. I stood up, and my shadow stood with me. We walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the hallway. The building was full of separations. I could see them now. The gaps where people had pushed away parts of themselves, the voids where shadows should be but weren't. Sarah's door was 3 floors up. I knocked softly. It was late, but I knew she'd be awake. People without their shadows rarely sleep well. She opened the door, looking tired and suspicious. "Hi," I said. "This is going to sound strange, but I found something that belongs to you." I stepped aside, and her shadow rushed forward from behind me. The moment it touched her feet, she gasped. 20 years of numbness ended in an instant. 20 years of feeling incomplete suddenly made sense. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "How did you know?" "Family curse," I said, "or gift, depends on how you look at it." We talked until dawn, about shadows and separation, about the thin places in reality, about how being broken didn't mean being worthless. By the time the sun rose, she had integrated with her shadow. The process was painful, like mine had been, but necessary. That was 3 months ago. Now there are 12 of us who meet every week. 12 people who lost and reclaimed their shadows. We call ourselves the Reconciled. We help others understand that the darkness isn't the enemy. Separation is. My shadow and I have learned to work together, to use what it learned in those 20 years apart. We can see things others can't. The spaces between spaces. The conversations that happen in empty rooms. The places where lost things wait to be found. Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the industrial district. The factories don't seem abandoned to me anymore. They're full of shadows, waiting, hoping, looking for their other halves. I help when I can, guide them toward their people, whisper reminders about promises made to the dying and rules that are meant to be broken. My grandmother was right about one thing. The shadow doesn't belong to you after dark. But she was wrong about the reason. It doesn't belong to you because it is you, the dark you, the honest you, the you that exists in the spaces between what you show the world and what you really are. I kept walking that night, but this time, my shadow didn't just follow. It led. It showed me the way home, the real way, through the darkness and incompleteness and fear to something resembling wholeness. And sometimes, on nights when the streetlights flickered just right, I let my shadow lead still. It knows the way through the dark better than I ever will. After all, it spent 20 years learning the paths I was too afraid to walk. The other shadows don't frighten me anymore. They're just lost people looking for themselves. And I should know. I was one of them, until the night my shadow froze while I kept walking. The night I learned that running from your darkness only gives it time to grow stronger. Now we walk together, always together. Even when the streetlights die and the world becomes uncertain. Even when reality thins and shows its cracks. Even when the whispers from the alleyways call out, keep walking, keep walking, keep walking. We do keep walking, but now we know why. We're walking toward something, not away. Walking toward all the other broken people who don't yet know that their shadows are out there, waiting to come home, waiting to make them whole, waiting to teach them that darkness isn't the opposite of light. It's just light that hasn't learned to shine yet.